My experience with AI dates back 10 years ago. I started getting an interest in deep learning, went from the computer vision side to understand how deep learning models work. With everything that came about with ChatGPT, I fell back into love with AI and have started to just tinkering ever since.
You built a really cool software that takes Zillow data and allows investors to process that more quickly and make better decisions. Did you make that using AI?
It was, yeah. I was on paternity leave. I had some time and spun it up real quick.
You're probably the most knowledgeable person that I've had on here. Peter, I am excited to learn about AI from you. You have no idea. I can't sleep the last week. It's just been drinking from a fire hydrant. So you have a really cool background and experience. Quickly tell us, what do you do and what's your experience with AI?
Yep, definitely. So in the consulting space, my experience with AI kind of dates back to about 10 years ago. I started getting an interest in deep learning, went from the computer vision side to understand how deep learning models worked. From there, with everything that came about with ChatGPT, using neural networks to help with more text-based processing, I fell back into love with AI and have started to just kind of be tinkering ever since.
So you were into AI before it was sexy.
Right, exactly. Yeah, when it
Or,
was just
or better said, you were into AI when they called it machine learning.
right. Yeah, exactly.
It is pretty funny to see some of these rebrands of like algorithm is now AI, machine learning is now AI, remote or robotic process automation is now agents. Agents will be different than RPA, but right now it's like that's essentially what agents are. So the rebrand has been amazing. Cool. And so you were telling me before our call, you've done some really cool things in the tech space. You've obviously spun up your own consulting agency where you are helping people architect. What's the best word for it? Data flows, data architecture.
Yep, yeah, helping figure out how, to connect their different systems to different data so they can help with different marketing segmentation activities.
But you've also built a really cool software that takes Zillow data and allows investors to process that more quickly and make better decisions. Did you make that using AI, or was that just software you developed before you really got
Yeah,
heavy into it? But it was.
it was, yeah. So I did it. It was probably just when like GPT-3, maybe GPT-4 was just coming out, and I was able
Mhm.
to sort of quickly spin that up. I was on paternity leave, so I had some time, and I was able to connect with someone online who was an influencer, who could kind of help with some distribution, and just kind of spun it up real quickly. I had some time, clicked to the Stripe API, and was sort of off to the races after that.
And so what was that business? I know you said you own several rental properties, but what is this business in particular, software serving?
Yeah. So right now, it initially was serving more kind of the real estate investor community of putting in addresses and sort of getting back some of the Zillow metric data in more of a bulk upload process. Right now, figured that a lot of folks on the direct mail side have a use for some of this data, being able to segment out different property types, different home values, and then can provide certain offers based on those specific home type values.
And what's it called?
So it's called right now, it's just bulkupload.info.
Bulkupload.info.
Yep.
Dude, those are the best names because there's nothing worse than trying to remember, oh, what's that website that does bulk uploads? Oh, it's phalanganang.com. You're like,
Right.
it's a name no one's ever heard of.
Right.
So I love that. The question I always ask, which models are you using and what are you using them for?
Yep. So I really feel like I use probably all the models that that are really popular at the moment. So, Claude, I think is great. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about Claude. I think ChatGPT o1 Pro, I think it really gets a bad rap being so expensive. It's sort of like it justifies the cost right now. It still is something that when I run into a really hard problem, it will just sort of just throw it at it. And, a lot of times it'll just help get me started going down the right direction. And then as well as Grok, I wasn't surprising that to come out and be as useful as it was. I don't know if it gets as deep into some of the different topics, but being able to use it for pretty low cost.
It's been surprising to me to see how many people are saying they're using Grok already. Like it's pretty quickly become like a tier one model. And I don't know about performance. I mean, to me, it's fantastic, but
Yeah.
as usage, it's become like this tier one model. That's interesting. So you're using Claude for coding, ChatGPT for brainstorming, ideation, problem solving.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to put it. I don't use Claude as much as that ideation partner. A lot of it's using ChatGPT. 4.5 has been interesting.
I have a question. Sorry, because I'm very stupid. One of the things I was like trying to figure out this weekend is what's the difference between all the models? because you've got 4.5, 3.5, 3.0, you've got O1,
Yeah.
O3, O1 mini.
Right.
Like, I'm a novice. I'm like, well, what do I use each one of these for? Do you know? Like, could you explain to me what they're used for?
Yeah, see, O1 I usually use for more technical problems. So it's like more of a technical type solution where it's like a lot of coding, or I give it sort of a lot of data in the context itself and then want it to churn through a lot of different options, different paths to follow to get to a right solution. Usually I use 4.5. It's more of a writing tool or just a thought partner where I'm trying to sort of think through different things, marketing tactics, things like that. I'll just kind of ask questions, get a better depth of understanding.
So is O1 better for things like uploading data and then asking it to execute certain tasks?
I think so, yeah. I would say so because it just has a lot longer to think about the actual data itself, and it gets some of those tasks back.
Okay, here's an interesting thing. Hopefully you can help me with it. I've done a number of these interviews and I took 12 of them and I batched them.
Okay.
And now 12 of them wouldn't have normally fit in the context window, but I cleaned them up. I got rid of timestamps and ums and ahs and all that stuff. And so I was able to get it, I think, to 110,000 tokens or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
I upload it and then I asked ChatGPT, and I was using 4.0, hey, analyze this data for me. Which models are the most repeated? Which ones are the highest preference? What are the different businesses that use them? Just a whole suite of analytics, right? And so it spit some stuff out, but the first spit out only had 5 of the 12 people that I interviewed.
Hmm.
And then I was like, well, you're missing this person, this person, this person. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Let me go back through and
Yeah.
make sure. And then it spit back out 10 of the 12. And I'm like, well, you're still missing this person and this. Anyway, so like I went through this iterative process with it where it was obviously missing data. Like even one of the people said, I really like Grok, and it didn't have it listed with that person. And I just remembered in the conversation that they had said that. And then I said, oh, that you missed this. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry about that.
Right.
Why did it miss that? Like, was I using 4.0? Should I have used O1 instead of 4.0 to do that type of analysis?
So I'd say probably, I think O1 would probably be a better one for that type of analysis, again, because it'll have more time to sort of think, right? It's a difference between, right? I think it's the new models are using the test time inference. So when you actually call these models, right, they've done through all their training and there's just this model that's sitting there, and right, you're calling it specifically. And so for 4.0, you're just calling that model directly and getting back the response. However, when you're doing test time inference, right, it's sort of going through that model and performing sort of more processing power on that. So it's sort of doing more, right, they call thinking over the data. But for large contexts, something that I hadn't mentioned previously is Gemini. Right? I don't know if people have talked a whole lot about Gemini, Google's model.
No, honestly, that surprised me. Is only 2 people of the 20-ish that I've interviewed so far have said that's their preferred model.
Okay.
And can I tell you some things about Gemini that I've learned, and then you can tell me why
Sure.
where I'm wrong or if I'm wrong?
Sure.
I didn't realize the context window was so big. 1 million tokens, Claude is 200,000, and then OpenAI's is 120,000. But I didn't realize it was so much bigger than the other models, which was crazy to me. The other thing that people have said is it's fantastic if you're trying to code or automate within the Google Suite, because it just knows it so well. And so if you're trying to figure something out, it does that. But other than that, people aren't, from what I've seen, they're not using it as like their go-to model.
Yeah, but I think that's definitely true. I think the large context window, I found it nice for videos, right? So like I'll put YouTube videos and things like that I really just don't want to necessarily won't remember everything or just don't have time to actually watch. And also just chat over it. I know there's the Notebook LM tool. I don't know if you've used that or anyone's talked to you about that. Okay, yeah. So it's like similar to that, but you're just doing it in a more defined scope because you can control more of the parameters. Notebook LM is for someone just who's playing with AI or just really using it more as a productivity tool versus sort of having more ways to tinker and fine tune the specific aspects of it. So for your kind of example, right, I think you'd probably be able to throw all the transcripts in without having to probably do as much of that pre-processing step, but also would be curious what those results are based on that, just because the context window is so much larger.
Okay, let me ask this. Sorry, I do want to get to your example.
No, that's all right.
You're probably the most knowledgeable person that I've had on here from a technical background, because you worked in machine learning in particular in this space. Like I've had other people who have worked in tech, but I just think your specific experience is better than anybody I've had. So I'm very curious about this. As I've been learning about the context window, and for those who don't know what the context window is, when you're asking ChatGPT a question, It's been trained on this model. It has all this data and all this information that it pulls on, but it doesn't have everything. It's not trained on every piece of information that's ever been out there. So an example that I give is if you're in healthcare, maybe you want it to help you understand whether or not someone has COPD, which is a diagnosis. Well, in order for the model to help you, you need to give it some context. And so you might upload, here's the American Heart Association's guidelines for COPD. Here's Medicare's guidelines for COPD and the criteria that's required in order to meet this diagnosis. Now that you have that information, here is a patient record. Does this patient have COPD? And so it will take the base model that it's been trained on, but now this new context that you've uploaded, and then look at that patient and say, oh, yep, these were their O2 stats. This is how much weight they've gained or lost. This is, et cetera, a million things, and then they'll give you an answer. But that context window is finite for every one of these models. So for ChatGPT, it's 120,000 tokens. 120,000 tokens is approximately, let's call it 300 pages. And then you've got Claude, which is 200,000 tokens. So it's a little bit bigger, almost double. But 1 million tokens is almost 10 times larger than ChatGPT. So it now turns into a 3,000 page book as opposed to a 300 page book. So that's why context windows are important, because you don't necessarily want to refine these models or train these models on your own data, but you do want them to have some type of context to answer the questions that you want to upload. Anyway, so that's what people mean when they're talking about context windows. Did I miss anything on the context window explanation?
No, yeah, but I think that's good. I think also speaking on context window is thinking about the output as well, right? So,
hey, I don't know if you remember this, but when we started this podcast, we entered into a social contract. I would spend time, energy, and money producing this podcast, interviewing these individuals, and giving you insights into how to build, buy, start, grow your business. And you would like, subscribe, and leave me 5-star review. Now, out of that, we both get to talk to really cool people and hear really cool insights. We both get a ton of value. But I just want to help you keep your word. So would you do me a favor? Will you go leave a 5-star review for me on Apple or Spotify? It would really help. And if you want, even share this with a friend.
the context that gets brought in when you think about that is also part of the output. So you may not have as robust of an output because you filled up that context with the input data. So
I did not know that. Hold on. Say that again. What does that mean?
So it's kind of a total, when you think about context, it's a total context, right? So if you fill out the whole context window, there's a possibility that you're not going to also get as robust an output because it's sort of a finite, it's a fixed amount of space.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if you put
So
in...
it's not just about the input.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You have to do, there's an output context window as well. So a lot of these models have shorter output context windows. So they've just now had larger and larger ones, and that's what makes them even better for coding, because at some point you would have had to have stopped at maybe, let's say, 300 lines of code. And so that gets hard to iterate and do a lot of edits and things like that, because it can't just churn through an entire sort of file of coding.
Is there an optimal use of the context window? If you're like, oh, only use up to 80% of the context window because you want that other 20% to be used for the output, or does it not matter?
So usually the output is so much smaller than the input that it sort of doesn't matter that much. So usually you're gonna sort of fill up that. Yeah, there's also, there's an input and output context window.
You just freaking blew my mind, dude. Oh my gosh. Okay, but my question on the context window in particular is, as I've read, Claude, for example, okay, larger context window than ChatGPT. However, the output may not be as precise because it's a larger context window. It can't necessarily be as precise or as fast as ChatGPT. Is that true for Google as well? It's like, cool, you've got 1 million token context window, but if you're looking for precise answers, it's not going to be able to give you that?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's the hard thing, is all the different evaluation models are really sort of, right, everyone's sort of trying to fight for supremacy, right, across closed source models and open source models. And so everyone will say, right, there's sort of the classic example is the needle in the haystack kind of model, where they would put some type of embedding into the context, and it would sort of prove that, hey, I was able to find anything in this context window because I sort of hid this particular value in the large context window, and the model was able to recall it. Well, everyone now sort of hits that benchmark, so it's no longer super valid. So everyone will sort of say that it has really good recall over a large context, but I think in practice, most people have realized it didn't. So therefore, that using RAG, retrieval augmented generation, I don't know if you've touched on that at all, but that's really helpful when you have those really large contexts that are going to fit within outside of any particular type of, actual context window. You would sort of store these documents in chunks, or it's called embeddings. And essentially you would do retrieval based on this vector search. So essentially just a similarity of your question with the actual documents, and it would retrieve sort of subsets of documents and then embed that into the context, right? So if you're going through, hundreds of files, right, thousands of files, you wouldn't be able to put that in any type of context window. And so that's when people use tools like RAG to chunk out those specific portions of those documents that may be most relevant to the question and feed that into the context, and then are able to then answer questions based off of that.
Well, here's my question for you. Business owners, there's kind of two functions in my mind for AI right now. If I were to break them down, one's qualitative, one's quantitative. The qualitative are like, how do I write this piece of marketing material? How do I think through this problem, this process, right? Like, help me. You're an assistant, you're an analyst, you're somebody who's giving them advice. And then there's a quantitative aspect, which frankly, I didn't use up until recently, which is, here's a spreadsheet, help me understand my cost structure. Where am I spending that I shouldn't be spending? And that can be anywhere from 100 lines to 1,000 lines to 10,000 lines, depending on how long of a time period you're giving, et cetera. Which of the models are best for the quantitative side of uploading a spreadsheet and then asking for insights from that spreadsheet, where it's not going to hallucinate? It's not going to do that example that I gave earlier where it's going to miss, 5 of the 7 people. Is there a model that's better for that than others?
So probably not, I would say. There's probably no great model that's going to be great at inputting data and necessarily getting outputs that are not going to be any type of, right, hallucinations involved. I think the best models and the best sort of paradigm for doing data analysis is going to be through sort of using AI to generate code. Because code is something that, when you run code 100 out of 100 times, it's going to give you the same response. Right? The inputs are going to match the outputs. Versus AI models, there's still always a chance that it could be hallucinating something in there. So if you're going to want something that's discrete and finite as your output, you're going to want to use AI to generate specific blocks of code to run over the data. And that's where there's a lot of tools out there to do sort of that data analysis using AI. I think Google came out with one recently for sort of data scientists. Essentially, we don't need to be a data scientist to sort of ask those questions and have the model write the code to actually go over spreadsheets and things like that.
Like, if you're a business owner and you're relying on this give inferences that allow you to make a decision, you don't want it hallucinating. But what you just said makes total sense, right? Like, now you're going to want to use it to write the code that allows you to pull out the exact data and information.
Right.
That's a really good insight. Okay, this will be my last question on this thread. But so what would I use then? Let's say I put the data in and I'm like, help me write code to look at this data. Where do I put the code? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so Google Suite, I think, is pretty good because they have these things called notebooks, essentially, that let you run sort of code cell by cell and sort of then see the output through there. So it's sort of an easy way to start versus trying to sort of spin up your own, ID or some type of process to get started to actually write certain Python code. You can do it directly in there.
I've been using Google Colab. That's where.
Yeah, Google Colab. Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Colab, dude.
I could be.
No. I think that's right. Have you ever used Zapier?
I have a little bit.
Okay. I called it Zapier for like 8 years until I heard another human being call it Zapier. So, okay, Colab is definitely the way to use it. Oh my gosh. Okay, so then I would use ChatGPT to say, hey, I've got this data file. I want to extract insights from it. Help me write code that will extract the insights that I want. And then I go to Google Colab. That's where I would then input the Python script, have it run, and then it would spit out a CSV that I could then go and analyze.
Yep, exactly. And then, so recently, I think Google's come out with a tool that's now directly should be embedded in that tool to sort of help streamline that process. It's hard to get, again, that's where you sort of ask the questions, right? As someone who may not be sort of proficient in statistics and sort of all those things, right? Once you start getting into the complexity of data science, right? Now you have a thought partner in those ChatGPTs or those Claudes to sort of ask questions over, am I doing this right? Does this make sense? Like, they're asking all those questions that you may ask Google, but now it's in a conversation over your own stuff.
Yeah, the thing I've started doing now is like every time it gives me an output, I just take the output and put it back into ChatGPT, and I'm like, this is the output it generated. And then it's like, oh, I see the problem. I accidentally
Right.
wrote this and not this, and then it'll fix it.
Right.
And, it's like this iterative process. It's never just one and done. Okay, I want to see how you're using AI in your business. I want to learn about MCPs. Please help me.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So yeah, let me share over here and take a look. So Claude is sort of the tool of choice that I've been using for actually a lot of my development work as well. So one of the cool things about Claude is the ability to actually access these MCPs that a lot of folks have been talking about, which really, so how I think about it is it's nothing more than using sort of APIs essentially that you can interact with through a chat-like interface, which is actually sort of really nice. I've gone away from using tools like Windsurf to do development work because using Claude to actually write scripts and actually write different functions in your own file system has been just really useful in terms of having a lot more sort of control over the inputs and the outputs versus using some tools like Cursor or Windsurf where you don't have as much fine-grained control over sort of some of the agentic actions. So specifically, I can kind of pull up. I have a lot of MCP tools, but the ones that I've been using
Can
a
you,
lot.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Can you
sure.
explain what MCP means?
Generally, it just allows the model to call tools that it wasn't trained on or didn't have access to. So being able to do a web search, I can call a tool to do a web search. Right now, I have one to connect to my Notion board. So as I do some type of sort of project management activities, I can talk to my Notion board, ask some of the activities that I want to do. It can create different cards and can move cards through my Kanban board. So I can do that all from this interface without having to actually go to Notion to do any of that.
Yeah, I had somebody on last week who was he was demoing this product that he made that was text to voice,
Okay.
and it was running on a local server, and he was showing me, again, I'm way out of my depth here, but I'm just trying to explain what I saw. It's like the humans, anybody who saw a UFO, just like trying to use their words to describe what they saw. Anyways, on his screen was this, I don't know, wall of code. However, he was using Claude to interface with it, where it was like, oh, that's not exactly what I was trying to do. And then it would
Yeah.
actually change the code. And that was kind of mind blowing to see.
Yeah.
So it kind of opens up a whole new world when you're able to execute those tasks from an interface that you're already used to, like Claude, as opposed to having Claude, tell me what to do. Okay, cool. Now, then you go to Kanban and you create the card and you create the flow. Claude creating that for you is much better and much easier.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So something I can do. Let me see if I can use speaking of text to voice. So I can just say, let's say, create a Python demo, but first. So let's first create a actual Notion card for a engineer to do this work, and then let's create the Python Hello World demo. So I can start off here. It'll ask me to go ahead and confirm these tools. So right now I can't just hit it and let it go. Sort of still have to be here and watch what it's doing as it sort of works across the different file systems. Right now it's reading Notion, going out to Notion, and looking to create a database page.
And sorry, prompt is small. Will you read just the prompt that you put in the window?
Yeah. It says, let's create a Hello World Python demo. And then first let's create a actual card on my Notion board for an engineer to tackle.
So it's that simple. Hey, let's create a card on my Notion board.
Yep, exactly.
And it knows that it just has to ask you for permissions, and it starts going through that process.
Yep, yeah, exactly. So it went and was able to, so it's creating and running all these different tools that it has access to. So it's going out there, it's looking for what it needs to do, it's figuring out that it's not able to do that, and then it decides, okay, this is what I actually, this is the tool that I need to actually execute that task. So it created an actual card here. And so now I can just say, using my MCP file system tool, so I can just tell it directly to use a tool to go ahead and actually implement this Hello World example file.
Oh, so it just knows.
So now it's going directly into my environment. It's on my machine, and it's creating a new path, a new example. Try again later. So let's see, it'll retry here.
When did they come out with this tool or the ability for it to do this?
Yeah, it's got to be a few months back now that they sort of came out with this.
Yeah, because having the ability to be in the middle of a conversation or, middle of working with it and saying like, oh, yeah, create a Notion reminder for me to, finish this project instead of having to go to Notion, create it yourself, etc.
Right,
Feels like a
exactly.
game changer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's really nice when you start putting multiple tools together and able to sort of combine them. So let's see here. I'll stop it and try it again here. And so has anyone also gone through any of the sort of 3.7 updates around the thinking at all?
No, I mean, everyone's just talked about how Sonnet is so much better than
Yeah.
3.5, but I don't know why.
Okay, yeah. So one of the things that they have done recently was they implemented, which is what OpenAI hopes to do, which is essentially sort of a hybrid model. And so it's the models based on the input is deciding sort of how long to think. So like right now, it's an extended thinking and it used 8 seconds to sort of think time, which is just giving it more of that test time compute to
Mm-hmm.
iterate through and sort of make a game plan. But what has been cool and why I've also enjoyed working through MCPs more is that I'm also able to sort of control that thinking parameter a little bit more. And so you can sort of ask it to say, hey, I want you to think really hard about this problem, right? And so it'll actually, that time will increase as it spends more time sort of thinking through that particular problem. And so you can even sort of give it an amount of tokens you want it to think. So you can say, I want you to think for 5,000 thinking tokens. You can sort of watch. It doesn't always sort of behave exactly how you want these models, but a lot of the times it'll sort of go through that process more and more in that actual thinking block.
So are you using Sonnet a lot as a thought partner more than ChatGPT at this point?
So really, I'm using ChatGPT more as a thought partner, and using Claude as more as the executor of those tasks.
And does 3.7, does the Sonnet update help with that execution piece?
So I think so. I think it doesn't do well, I found, in integrating in other tools. So for example, with Windsurf, I've had, which is sort of a cursor alternative. I haven't had a lot of good experience with it. It just doesn't seem to be as effective. But something that I have noticed in the actual tool itself, it seems to just be a whole lot better. I do use a lot of it for sort of front end design. So if I want to spin up a prototype of something really quickly, if I try to do that in Windsurf, it just doesn't look as nice and it just isn't as good. But if I'm able to do it in this actual sort of Claude desktop application, you can sort of actually use it. You can use the artifact. You can sort of see what it's looking like. You can actually sort of play around with it, and then you can just tell it using these MCP tools, hey, go in my actual directory and implement it. So there's no sort of copy and pasting over.
Tell me, what's Claude doing right now? So like I could tell it's thinking, but it's answering as we're talking. So you asked it to go out and execute this task. What's it actually doing?
So it was listing some directories to see if there's any sort of existing directories, searching for different files, and then it's continuing to search for files here. I'm not sure why it's running for a while. It seems like there may be a network connection. I was having some other issues with Claude this morning, so I don't know if there's something else going on or if it's struggling to perform this search.
No worries. This was awesome. Like, this was a fantastic conversation. So I may have to have you come back on and actually like go through another MCP demo because I didn't even let you get to it until way late in the conversation. So where can people come find you? I know you have a company, Bulk. Is it bulkupload.info?
Bulkupload.info. Yeah, that's right.
Where else can people come find you, Peter?
And then so just started getting into Twitter. So I think my handle is Biz Scout Guy. So as I start to looking to acquire some smaller businesses, you got to find me as I talk through that as well.
Okay, I love it. Biz Scout Guy. All right, hopefully you liked that episode. And if you've made it this far, you're either really committed or you're stuck doing yard work and you can't actually skip on your phone. So while I have you, the show is growing, but I have a favor to ask of you. Will you please help me grow the show? I want to reach more people. There's a couple things that you can do. Like and subscribe is the simplest thing. Obviously, you want to get notifications for when the next episode is coming out. But if you go the next step, will you leave me a review? 5-star on Spotify or Apple. What that does is it tells the algorithm that, oh, hey, this is a high value podcast because more people are leaving reviews for it, and it then pushes it out to more people. So that's why when people are like, will you like and subscribe and put a 5-star rating? It's not just to make themselves feel better. It's actually to get more exposure for the show. So if you do that for me, I would greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.